latest installment of Dialogue, a partnership with WOSU. The Glenn College has been running this speaker series, this discussion series, I should say, for several years. And the spirit of this, as the title suggests, is to try and stimulate discussion and dialogue around timely and topical and sometimes contentious issues in the public square. Our goal up here is to try and represent a diversity of perspectives, but we know that we can't represent all perspectives up here on the stage, but we hope that you are going to be active participants in this process. So we're going to be looking to try and create a discussion and a dialogue with all of you, and in a minute you'll hear how that's going to work. We ask of you only the following. Number one, that you be attentive. That's the easy part. Number two, and this is a little bit harder, is to be engaged. We really do want to hear from you. We do want to hear your perspectives on the topics that we discuss here. And the third part is the only requirement in being engaged is that you be respectful and civil. The topics that we discuss here sometimes are contentious, and we welcome disagreement, but we want to do it in a way that we respect each other's perspectives and opinions. We have the good fortune of doing this particular topic about issues surrounding women running for elected office here in Ohio to coincide with a program that the Glenn College has been running for many, many years called New Leadership, which tries to encourage baccalaureate women in college, to think about, if not actively prepare for elected office. So here in the front 3 rows, or 4 rows, wave your hands everybody, are our 45 participants in the New Leadership program. So it's great that we're going to be able to coordinate this. And we have another partner in this. And unfortunately, the director of this organization, Women in Government, Lucy Getman, could not be here tonight. But they are our partner. It's a national organization that is driven to try and increase representation of women in elected office at the state and local level. So we're particularly proud to have them as partners tonight. But to my right is my good friend and our partner institutionally here at The Ohio State University, WOSU. I'm going to hand it over to him, Tom Ryland.
Thank you, Trevor. First of all, welcome and thank you for coming this evening. And I want to welcome officially to Columbus, Asma Khalid, NPR's political reporter. Asma, thank you for coming tonight. And it's welcome back to the Midwest. She had to get out of the East Coast, get out of Boston, get out of Washington, and come back because Asma grew up in Indiana. So it's great to have her back in the Midwest. To play off a little bit what Trevor said, our mission is to engage, inform, and inspire. And the engagement part is really important tonight. So be ready with your questions. We're not going to wait till the end. We're going to describe how this is going to go a little bit differently than usual as far as public forums are concerned. You're certainly going to leave here a lot more informed and hopefully inspired as well. I think all of you are inspiring us already, so thank you for coming. So this is videotaped, so be aware of that. It's actually on Facebook Live, which you can go to the WSU website and access. We have a live stream going on as well. It will be on WSU Ohio also June 8th and 14th will be broadcast. So just be aware that there might be a camera on you periodically throughout this. Just be aware of that, okay? So without further ado, for the logistics of tonight and how it's going to go, I wanted to introduce our Chief Content Director of News and Public Affairs at WSU, Mike Thompson. Mike?
Thanks, Tom. I am the head of News and Public Affairs at WOSU, although my title here tonight is White Guy Number 3 on stage. So we will be moving off stage soon, and if the demographic trends are correct, us guys will be moving off stage big time in the next few decades. So thank you all for coming. And I'll just kind of run down how things are going to work. This is, as we've mentioned, this is a dialogue. We want to hear from you. This is a panel discussion, but you're a member of the panel. So how this is going to work is for the first 15 or 20 minutes or so, they'll set the stage, raise some issues, get you thinking, and then hopefully you will have some good comments, good questions, and then go to the microphones on the aisles. So you can wait in line or sit in the chairs near those if you'd like. But just be ready, and be ready to engage. It'll take about an hour. This program lasts about an hour, but we want to hear from you. We really do want this to be a dialogue. That being said, Trevor said civil, respectful. You can't be long. This is a dialogue, not a monologue. So keep your comments and your questions short, just out of respect for the other folks, so we can get it to as many comments and questions as we can. So let me get to, also, we are on Facebook Live, so we have someone here monitoring the Facebook comments. So if you're watching on Facebook, don't you be shy either. Type your question into the comment box, and we'll get to those questions as well. Now to our panel. We'll start with State Senator Shelia Tavares, a familiar face to many of you, I'm sure. She has served in the Ohio House. She has served on Columbus City Council. She has run statewide twice, and she now serves in the state Senate. Sophia Fifner from the Columbus Parks and Rec, or Recs and Parks. She directs community relations. She worked as a staffer in the U.S. Senate, and also worked as a political fundraiser in the private sector. So she knows a lot about women in politics from those angles. Wendy Smooth, you may know her as well. She is a professor of gender and women's studies at Ohio State University. She's also, my favorite title, a courtesy professor in political science. So Wendy.
Here.
And Asma, Khalid, if you may have heard her, you likely have heard her on NPR. She is one of the great, new, energetic, engaging voices on NPR that is really changing the sound for the better of our network and our station. So you've heard her on 89.7 NPR News. She covered the 2016 campaign and all that fun and excitement. You heard her on the NPR Politics podcast, and she is back covering politics for the midterm elections. So with that, Asma, it's all yours.
So I just want to begin by saying thank you. As was alluded to earlier, I'm from the Midwest, and I always treasure a chance to come back to the Midwest. I did tag team with some reporting, so you all might hear a story, not about this, but from the Columbus-Dayton area soon. So thank you all. I want to begin the conversation, Wendy, with you. So I do know that you are researching a book, right, about race and gender in politics. And I'm curious if you could just kind of outline for us that when you're looking at those two metrics, what have you noticed thus far in your research, particularly when those two things intersect?
Sure. So we are getting a lot more attention around these questions of intersectionality in politics. I actually remember back in 2008 when we first started to talk about the intersections of race and gender, particularly when we were looking at the South Carolina midterm elections and trying to figure out, well, what would these African American women do? Would they vote according to their gender? Would they vote according to their race? And I remember Anderson Cooper had a panel of my colleagues on, and they were trying to explain this complex, crazy term, intersectionality. And no one could get it right, and no one could simplify it enough. But one of the things that we started to talk about from a political perspective in relationship to intersectionality in politics is that it's not just that one person can think about themselves as a racialized human being or talk about themselves as a gendered human being, but the experiences are really informing each other, and that we have to think about them as always informing each other. So when we think about the way in which women of color in particular are showing up as voters in stronger and stronger numbers, they're thinking about questions that are related to gender, but they're thinking about them in terms of race. And when they're thinking about questions like community policing, they're also thinking about that from a gender perspective of also thinking about questions of motherhood in relationship to mothering young men of color, for example. So those are examples of how those intersections then inform their voting practices. And likewise with women running for public office, they're bringing the totality of who they are to the offices that they're running for. So it's really an error if we think about them, oh, it's the woman candidate, it's the black woman candidate. They're everything. They're also their communities and they're their issues. And I mean, Charlita could talk about how all of those things come into play. But
great. No, thank you. I think it's a great start. So Charlita, I was reading that you are the first African American to ever hold a leadership position in the history of the Ohio General Assembly. Is that right?
That's correct.
So congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
I'd love for you to give us, and I'm sure it's not brief, but to the extent that you can give us a brief snapshot, perhaps, of some of the barriers you faced in doing that job up to this point, or even maybe getting to that point.
Sure. Well, the job itself certainly is informed by who I am and who I attempt to represent. And because the voices are so small in the General Assembly with people of color and women, right now there's about 22% of the General Assembly that is made up of women. And I can speak more specifically right now to the Ohio Senate and the challenges. Out of the 5 African American legislators in the Ohio Senate, 4 of them currently are women, and 3 are women and 2 are men. So as a woman, there are many committees that we don't have women sitting on. There are women of color in the Senate and 3 Caucasian women in the Senate. So there's 6 of us total. There are committees that we're not represented on, so our voice isn't heard.
Because numerically there's just not enough.
Correct, correct. And there was the last General Assembly where I serve on the Finance and Appropriations Committee, the most important committee in any General Assembly. And I was the only person of color, and I was the only woman sitting on that committee. And so I used the opportunity to share every time there was an issue that I had a question on. I would say, I'm asking this question because I'm the only woman and I'm the only person of color sitting on this panel. And it was televised. And so the more I said it, I think it embarrassed the members of the General Assembly that we only had one woman who had to lift up the issues for both people of color and women. So this General Assembly, there are 3 women and 2 people of color. So I believe that those kinds of challenges can provide opportunities so that you can ensure that more people are going to be at it, so the voice can be stronger.
Thank you. Sophia, you have worked in the public sector, the nonprofit sector, the private sector as well, and now you're working for the Parks Department. So given that you have that experience of working in public service, but also for a private corporation, can you compare and contrast what it is like to be a woman doing your job in those different spaces?
Sure. So I had one of the greatest opportunities to work for a Fortune 100 company that's based here in Columbus. And I would say, honestly, one of the biggest misperceptions that I had as a young graduate over 10 years ago is that corporations weren't inclusive or weren't trying to be inclusive. I had a unique experience where the corporation that I worked for wanted every woman at the table. At the moment when I was working there, the Lean In movement was very popular. There were work groups and focus groups throughout the organization that encouraged women to be at the table, and I had a manager who encouraged me to be at the table, not only as a woman, but as a woman of color. While my experience was exceptional, I realized that not everybody has that opportunity or that type of leadership. And in the corporate sector, I would hope that more managers take note of who's at the table. And then even in the public sector, working in the nonprofit space, and even for the City of Columbus, the City of Columbus has so many wonderful opportunities for men and women of color, but especially women. Our mayor here in Columbus does a fantastic job. He has a women's commission that encourages equal pay, women being at the table. I have a leader within Recreation and Parks that supports that type of leadership that's inclusive and open for all. So I feel that I'm really fortunate to be able to have management that speaks for women like myself. But for those who don't, I encourage them to use their voice and to speak up when they realize that there's no person of color or woman at the table to make important decisions.
I want to talk a little bit about institutions. And I should say, this question is for Wendy, but if both of you have thoughts, please chime in. Do you see that when we're talking about women in politics, that there are institutional challenges, let's say whether it's the legislature on a local level or we're talking about Congress, that have maybe give us a clue as to why we don't see as many women in some of these spaces?
Oh, sure. Where do we start, right? So one of the things, and we can think about Ohio politics in particular, one of the kinds of structural issues that face Ohio women is that we are a heavily Republican-dominated state at the moment. The state legislature, both the House and the Senate, are Republican-controlled. And what we know nationally regarding women in politics is that women tend to fare less well in the Republican Party than they do in the Democratic Party. So already we're at a disadvantage in terms of moving women into politics and into leadership. And that's a party issue, that the Republican Party could do a better job in its recruitment of women, and certainly that does not let the Democratic Party off the hook as well, that there's work to do on both sides, because we know nationally the political parties do not do enough to recruit women. The research is very direct in that regard. And what we're seeing for 2018 are women are recruiting each other, right? So we're seeing this enormous uptick in women running for political office, and a lot of it is happening by organizations that are run by women, some of them by women of color, who are doing the recruitment of women candidates. They're doing the trainings. They are teaching women how to fundraise. Those are a lot of the activities that we typically think parties are responsible for doing. But women are saying, if the parties won't do it, we'll do it ourselves. And this is part of what we're seeing in this tidal wave, pink wave, second wave, all the waves that we want to talk about for this particular election cycle. So that's the parties are a huge structural barrier for why we don't see more women running for public office.
Shelia, you've been in the space. Yeah, do you want to chime in?
I would totally agree with what Wendy said. But on top of that, we as women have to support each other and encourage each other. And you don't wait on somebody to recruit you. You recruit yourself if you think you have the skills and talents and something to offer to the community you say you want to serve. Because the men will always step up, whether they have the skills that are needed for that position or not, or whether or not their community believes that they're the best candidate or not. Women are many times scared off about the amount of money that they think that they have to raise. And I underscore think, because they will scare you off. They will use that as a tactic, that you have to raise enormous sums of money. I'm a firm believer. If you provide good service throughout your career, and you have other people speaking to your skills and talents, your accomplishments for your community, then you already have your ambassadors for your campaign and people that are chiming in about your effectiveness and your commitment to the community that you want to serve. So that's a tactic to scare people off, and women can do anything. They've raised money for PTAs and PTOs, for churches, for all the civic organizations. They can raise it with their friends and family if that's what they choose to do. But I think the best candidates as women are those women who have it in their gut that this is what I want to do, and I believe I have something to offer to my community and that I can do it in the best way possible.
Sophia, I actually wanted to ask you also about specifically the fundraising piece she mentioned, because you have seen that intimately. I recognize on the corporate side, but do you see some of those same challenges in fundraising? We're talking about women candidates?
Absolutely. For some reason, women are great at asking a friend for their advice or their opinion, but when it comes to money, it's like, oh no, I don't want to talk about money. And that's one of my favorite things to talk about. I want to ask people for money. I want them to get engaged because it costs. You have to pay for those resources to make sure that you have a great campaign and that you're visible and people know who you are and know why you want to serve. So I do see those same challenges, but I wanted to touch on the Republican institution. After the 2016 election, I woke up, I recently had my daughter. I woke up a few days after the election and I was just sobbing. I am a conservative. I've been a conservative for a very long time, part of the Republican Party. I worked for a conservative, and I woke up to a world that I did not recognize. And speaking of those institutions, I think one of the biggest things that conservative women need to do is to make sure that those institutions do not leave our voices out.
Oh, sure.
So that from that moment, I realized that I can't be silent anymore. I can't say, oh yeah, I'll let somebody else lead. I need to figure out a way to get engaged in the public sector and to run for office one day. So I'm hoping that more conservative women will get that bug and stay engaged, because that can't be the
to
voice.
run for office, it sounds like.
I love my job, but yes, in the future, absolutely, because we can't have the individuals who are running our country right now. That can't be the voice for the United States, and especially for the conservative movement. That's not acceptable to me. So yes, and I think more women like myself who are conservative or liberal, take it up, run for office. You can do it.
You know, I want to pick up on both of the components. This is a great conversation. One of the things that we know from the research is that women can raise the money, right? And we know, I love that phrase of it, it's a scare tactic, right? So as researchers, we've been trying to put the news out that the data does not support this idea that women can't raise the money. Women can raise the money on the same levels as their male counterparts. And the other thing, to speak to this issue around conservative women, by all means, we need a lot of different voices in our public debates. The Tea Party movement, if you really are a good student of the Tea Party movement, women were so vocal in that early conceptualization of the Tea Party movement, right? And my students know, some of my graduate students will know, we read that there, we read on the Tea Party women very clearly, because they were so organized and so willing to put away their divisive issues to figure out the things that they could work together on. And I think that that is one of the things that we can think about in terms of women in politics. We can find those spaces that we can agree, and then we say the rest of it, we can agree to disagree, and then we move through it. I mean, I look at all of the wonderful things that you've been able to do on health issues that are bipartisan efforts that always give me, as a citizen, like hope that polarization doesn't have to be the end-all, be-all, right?
I'm glad you said that, because if we had women in the leadership roles in the Ohio House and the Ohio Senate, there would be more work done together. Right now, it is so polarized, which is another issue that's keeping women from coming into elective office. They see the vitriol, they see that they are so polarized, they're so nasty towards each other that they don't want to be a part of it. And I have Republican women in the Ohio Senate, this General Assembly and previous General Assemblies, that have wanted to work with me. A perfect example is the elimination of the zero tolerance law. I started the conversation in 2013. I wanted to eliminate it because it was bad public policy, and it was being implemented in a disproportionate way to children of color and children who were disabled. And so I had a Republican female colleague who wanted to work on it with me, but she was getting pushback from the males. And so she introduced a bill, which I certainly supported, that takes a first step. It's pre-K to third grade, that we would not allow for expulsions and suspensions. And I applaud her. But what happens to the rest of the children?
Sure.
And it's like they don't care about the rest of the children. But she wants to work on other issues, but the leadership determines what goes forward. And so the president of the Senate or the Speaker of the House determine which bills go to the floor. And that controls what you're able to work on together.
Can I ask you a bit about sort of a tangentially related issue, right? Because you mentioned leadership. I'm very interested in the limited roles and limited opportunities that women have found in statewide offices. Not here necessarily in Ohio, but across the country. In fact, I was just in Georgia. I don't know if you all were paying much attention, but Georgia had a really interesting Democratic primary race for governor where there were two women running. They were both named Stacy. So just to give you all the quick recap, two women named Stacy, very identical resumes in some ways. They were both lawyers, both former state legislators. One of the candidates was white and the other was African American. Just to sort of jump ahead, Stacey Abrams is the African-American candidate, won on Tuesday night. But the big question mark that a lot of folks still have is, not only can any generic Democrat win in the state of Georgia, but really, can a woman win? Can an African American woman win statewide? And there's this constant question mark about this. I know here in Ohio there was a woman who was running, Mary Taylor as well, for the governorship, did not make it through the primaries. So talk to me a little bit, and maybe Shelia, you can start, but I'd love to hear your guys' all take on this issue of statewide leadership positions where we're not seeing women.
It has been very challenging in the state of Ohio for African American and women of color to run statewide. I can speak to the Democrat ticket because I know each of the women who have run statewide and the challenges they faced with support, not only from, in many cases, the party specifically, but from those constituency groups that generally support candidates.
Sorry, what does that mean exactly, the constituency?
Meaning like labor and other kinds of constituency groups that support candidate A or B based on their party affiliation or ideology. African American women have not done well. African American candidates totally have not done well, other than those who have been Republican. A former colleague of mine served on city council with me. We were both named as lieutenant governor candidates. I was named first, and she was named second by the sitting governor in a race for governor. And he won, which was not a huge surprise because he certainly was the incumbent. But at least we had an African American woman that was elected for the first time in Ohio as a lieutenant governor and for a statewide office. We've had African American men elected statewide for a long period of time on the Republican Party side. And I do say that my party has a lot to do in order to be very vested in all of its constituents and all of its leadership within the party.
Would you like to chime in?
So I think one of the ways that we can change this is by supporting women who are running for office. And in Ohio, the Matriots PAC, which started last year and has raised a momentous amount of resources for women, is supporting women candidates, both Republican, Democrat, Green, but they're working on issues that I think we can all agree on, making sure that we all have a seat at the table, that we're protecting reproductive rights. These are things that we can all agree on, and I think that that's one of the ways that we can change the way that our state leadership looks like, both on the Republican and on the Democratic side.
And what about you, Wendy?
Sure. So I'll start off by the new leadership women. We had this conversation Monday going into Tuesday, right? So you have some Georgia folks. Raise your hand. Georgia, yeah. So we were watching this race in Georgia on Monday, right? And this is a really interesting moment, and it's a wonderful experiment for all of us who study women in politics, and in particular women of color in politics, because for so long we've seen this difficulty that women of color have and people of color in general, in terms of running in statewide races. And so this is a really, all eyes on. And now that Stacey Abrams has emerged as the Democratic nominee, it's going to be really interesting to, again, I keep going back to parties, and I'm not even a party scholar, but going back to parties, this is going to be a really interesting look at whether or not the Democratic Party, in this case, will actually do the type of investments necessary to engage with voter turnout. Because the Abrams campaign is really focused on mobilizing women, mobilizing people of color, and mobilizing new immigrants, which are also a huge part of Georgia's new identity, right? And so for the party to actually understand what that mobilization looks like is going to be really critical to whether or not they're going to realize this success come the general election. The other thing that I wanted to speak to in terms of the state of Ohio, one of the things that we nationally look at is that lieutenant governor's seat. And we say, wow, that is the ultimate stepping stone for women. We've proven executive leadership. But as a new student of Ohio politics, I'm always dumbfounded that that has not led to women taking on the executive office. As you all well know, we've never had a woman governor in the state of Ohio. And so this upcoming race becomes another.
What has been the impediment?
It's a combination. I
So
think it's a
looking
combination
around.
of issues. It's in some cases it's party disinvestment or investment in other campaigns. It's not believing that the woman can win, and so choosing another candidate to be the party's nominee. And then again, if you're told over and over that you can't win this race, then sometimes you start to believe it. The lieutenant governor's position isn't generally one that people really move into the governor's seat, even for men. Because I can look at Mike DeWine, who was the lieutenant governor, and he didn't go to the governor's office, he went back into another office. So it's not just for women that they don't assume that role, but it's also for men. I just think we have to get women to support women to run for governor and to stick with them and not be convinced that they can't win. Because if we're not supporting them and if we're not voting for them, they're not going to win because we are the majority in the state of Ohio.
You know, I want to. I do want to piggyback on this women supporting women theme that we're landing on. I think it's so critically important. And I also, at this moment where there's so much press and so much coverage of the 2018 midterm elections, and there's so much emphasis on how many women are running. We're at unprecedented numbers of women who are running for Congress and women who are running for local offices across the country. But I worry, as some of my colleagues have expressed out of the Center for the American Woman in Politics, that as we've hyped this narrative that we're coming in for a change, what happens if, which we know, all of these women won't win?
And many of them are running in seats in which it is going to be nearly impossible.
They are doing the uphill battle. Like, if I were a political consultant, I would be like, oh, no, I mean, do it. Don't do it. But they've thrown the rule book out, and I think that's a part, we might think about that as another kind of spin-off of the Trump effect, that we've all thrown the rule book away, right? So you can wake up in the morning and decide you want to do whatever you want to do, and you can go out and do it. I used to make that up and say a man, and now I have like a title that goes in there. But, you know, we all have to think about the lessons that we'll collectively learn out of this election cycle that I think are so exciting, even more so than if these women win or not. We are talking about women running for political office. We are organizing groups like the Matriots in our local communities. Women are being highlighted on our news programs. I did 3 different media conversations today about women in politics. When I tell you that never happens, that never happens. So we're like engaged, right? And so I see 2018 as a part of the long game in terms of women in politics. We're setting it up for your run coming down the road. Because we're having conversations, we're priming the public, we're priming voters about being comfortable with women candidates and women in executive level offices like Stacey Abrams is running for. That's a win-win for the American public, right? And so that thing of supporting women candidates, we've got to support the ones who lose, and we've got to ask them, all right, you lost this one, you ready again? You know, what are we doing next? Because now you've got the key thing. You've got name recognition, right? And that is the ultimate piece of the political puzzle, right? And so use the name recognition. We need to encourage the women who lose to get back in and go for it again.
I know that we have talked for a while, and so I want to make sure that everyone has time for questions because I'm sure you all have lots of questions. So we have a mic in both aisles, and I would encourage you all to just go ahead, please line up. We can take questions as they come, and I'm sure you all have lots of questions, even though no one is getting up right now. Oh, there we go. Please, go ahead.
Hello. I would like to say that because I was born white, because the color I was wrapped in, I was given immediate privilege, unasked for and unearned. and I want to know what I can do to help rally more women to use their influence to support our sisters who are immigrants, and that are the women who are under the radar. What can we do?
Shelia, you work in the legislature, I presume, with a number. I mean, you mentioned this. Why don't you take that question? Yeah.
And thank you very much for the question. I think what you can do is to work with those women that you've seen that you believe would make excellent candidates and encourage them. Let them know that you're willing to help, because a lot of times it takes one person that they respect or somebody that they don't even really know well that has paid attention to their skills and talents and believes that they have something to offer. So share that, and then get your other sisters, whether they're women of color or Caucasian women, together and start working on the campaigns of those women who have stepped forward that you believe represent the best that we have to offer.
Hello, I'm glad to have you all here today. I am an alum of New Leadership Ohio. I just wanted to ask, what is the most difficulty you face being a woman in your positions, your current positions at the moment?
Sophia, you want to take that?
You know, honestly, I think the most challenging thing, and I'm going to speak directly to the women who are here for New Leadership, one of the most challenging things for my current role is being so young. I look young, I am young, I'm a millennial, and I have a very large responsibility, not only to my team, which includes folks who are baby boomers, to the residents of Columbus. And I challenge myself, I'm challenged every day with making sure that I'm speaking for my generation in a very positive way. And sometimes there's that little voice in the back of your head when you're in your 20s or when you're in your 30s where you think, gee, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I'm old enough, or I don't know if I have enough experience. And I don't think that that's necessarily uncommon for folks who are in their 20s or 30s, but maybe even just for women. Mm-hmm. And I tell myself every single day, you're asking that question that you're not supposed to be asking yourself. You can just do it. So for the women who are here, who are young, who are in the back of your mind, you have that tiny voice that says, gee, I don't know if I can do it. Oh my gosh, you so can. Every opportunity that I've had, whether it be running 17 packs for a Fortune 100 company in my mid-20s to right now, is because I said, yep, I'm going to do it. I'm going to figure out how to do it. I'm going to be the best person I possibly can be. So that would be the thing that I'm thinking of.
For me, it would be people underestimating your skills and abilities simply because you're a person of color or simply because you're a woman. I know we've all experienced the meeting where you've raised an issue or you've raised a solution or a recommendation, and they kind of skip by you. And then a male will raise the same issue, and, oh, John, that's a great idea. It's as if you weren't there. So you have to believe that your skills and talents are good, great, greatest, and that you have something to offer. And sometimes you can use that underestimation that others might have of you to your advantage, because then they're not going to see you coming.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Hi, Alyssa Schneider, the Executive Director of the Matriots, and I wake up every morning, thinking about how women can continue to support women. But my question to you is, we've talked a lot about how women can support women in elected office. How can men?
Hold fundraisers. Mm-hmm. Hold fundraisers and introduce women candidates to your networks, right? And say, this is the best person I know for job X. And I want to introduce you to 10 of my friends, and I expect, because this is what the boys say to each other, I expect you to introduce her to 10 of your friends.
I love that. Thank you.
Yes.
Does anybody else want to chime in? Yeah.
No, that's a great idea. Why don't you go ahead?
I would say for fathers and for brothers, tap your sisters and your daughters. One of the reasons why I am so interested in the political process is because of my father. He gave me an application to intern in Washington, D.C. I thought it would be the worst experience in my entire life. And because of him, my life has taken a completely different trajectory. So for fathers, talk to your daughters, and brothers, tap your sisters.
Mm-hmm. For me, I was groomed and mentored by a male because I didn't have a lot of women in public office that I could be mentored or groomed by. And so you can't underestimate them either. And particularly if they are anxious to get someone in office that they believe in. And so I worked as a staff member to the person I eventually replaced. And he groomed and mentored me to replace him in the Ohio House of Representatives. So you can't discount our male colleagues and the men in public office because many of them are champions on our issues and want to see the voice and the perspective of women at the table.
Thank you so much.
Go ahead, please.
Hi, I have a daughter who's adopted, African American. Our joke is I never told her she was adopted, but she seems disillusioned. I've urged her to look into the political scene. She's quite talented, community leader in many ways, and has done well. But when I talk about would she run for office of some sort, she just shuts it off. She says, I'm tired of it. I don't like what's going on, the backstabbing, etc. So how can I convince her?
You know, I have to say that is yeah, we're getting the finger snaps around there, right? That is a huge, I mean, like our current political moment is a huge discourager. It's a Debbie Downer, right? In terms of wanting to put yourself out there. But I think, particularly for women of color, a lot of times you're looking at the local issues that are impacting your community, what's happening in the schools, what's happening around community policing. And those are the issues that oftentimes resonate with women of color directly because they want to see that immediate change. And I'm like, go for it. City council, go for it, right? And you can see those kinds of immediate, the immediate impact of your presence and of your voice. And then we'll talk to her about the future and we'll move her through the pipeline. But perhaps there's an issue that she cares about. I often tell new leadership women to think about the issue that wakes you up in the morning and makes you the most upset and passionate and angry. And then figure out the space in public life that you can influence that issue. And that's a great way to get folks started.
And I would also suggest that she might look at being a staff member to an elected official, because you get to see firsthand, up close and personal, what takes place. And if you get a public official that you believe is doing it right, then you are going to get the best education possible. And if that person believes in you, then they can help you decide and help you in a good way decide whether this is what you want to do or not. I've had a lot of young people that I've hired over the years, and lots of young women of color and young men of color who I am trying to encourage to run for office because I believe that's my responsibility. And many of them come and work with me, and afterwards they decide, I don't want to be in front. I want to continue to be behind. But it's not for me, and it isn't for everyone. Just like, you know, being a physician isn't for everyone. This is a calling, and it's got to be something that you want to do. Now, you don't have to make a career out of it. You can do it for a short period of time, and I think that's another thing that people forget. You can do your public service just like people do their public service in the military. You can serve on the school board for 4 years. You can serve on the city council for 8, 10 years, but you don't have to do it for a lifetime if you choose not to. And most of the positions are part-time. City council was part-time. The state legislature is part-time.
I was wondering if you could say that with a straight face.
You know, so you can decide whether this is what you really want to do or not.
I would add to that, and everyone's trying to find their footing in how to get involved. Volunteer for a campaign. That's a great way. My interest in women in politics actually started from my best friend's mother was running for judge, and she had the possibility of becoming the first African-American woman judge. And then I started to realize the first, oh my, and I got outraged, right? And started to research more. But volunteering for a campaign, there are all kinds of talents. If you're a great communicator, by gosh, there's lots for you to do. So think about your talent and volunteer your talent and skills in the public sector in some way. And I think that helps us to realize this goal of more women in leadership.
And if I can just make a quick plug, it's not politics, but I would argue the news industry.
Oh, for sure.
A lot from having just a different sort of cohort of reporters. I mean, much was made about in the 2016 campaign. The joke was called, it was the girls on the bus, because the Hillary Clinton campaign had so many women campaign reporters, and it was just such a phenomenal change from what we had seen. But that being said, I actually do think that a lot of what we talk about, the discourse in the country, part of the narrative is shaped by what we hear, and part of what we hear is shaped by who is reporting those stories. And so I've often thought of journalism as a great public service. It's a little different, maybe, but you mentioned the military or the school board. I think of it in sort of the same light, that we're sort of contributing to the public dialogue in a slightly different way.
Sure. And right now, I'm really cheering for you.
Go ahead, please.
Hi, good evening, audience, panel. My name is Imani Edwards, and I'm a current member of the new leadership cohort for this year. And my question is specifically for State Senator Tavares. So my question is, do you take it more as a burden or an honor to at times being the only one, so the only woman in the room and or the only woman of color in the room? And with that, how do you find the strength to remain resilient, and how do you use that to also empower other individuals?
Thank you very much for the question. I don't take it as an honor because I don't want to be the only one. I think it's my responsibility to make sure that there are more than just one. And the whole being first is sad in 2018 that we're still saying so-and-so is the first at this or that. But for those of us who have been first, it's our responsibility to make sure we're not the last, that the door stays open, and that we do all that we can to ensure that people coming through that door look like us or look in an expanded way at the populations that we serve. As far as a burden, sometimes it gets heavy because you have to constantly cry out for those issues that are hurting your community, and you're passionate about them. If you're going to serve well, you have to be passionate about something that keeps you up at night. For me, it was people dying prematurely of diseases and illnesses. So again, I worked with a Republican colleague, Shannon Jones, out of Warren County, on infant mortality, because I saw that babies in my community were dying at almost 3 times the rate of Caucasian babies. We don't want any babies to die. However, if we're not there and if we're not pushing this issue, nobody else was. And so those are the burdens, because sometimes you're the only voice. And you've got to make sure that you're doing the very best you can to grow more advocates, to grow more voices wherever you are.
Thank you.
Go ahead, please.
How can we avoid implicit bias when relating to candidates and elected officials of color and women?
That is a great question.
It is.
And I would expand that to how do we inform ourselves about implicit bias in all that we do. And I think we would be in such a better space if more people were thinking about the role that implicit bias plays. So one is hearing that little voice in your head that's making you do the second look, and then interrogating, well, why am I asking that question? I wouldn't ask that question if it were a, fill in the blank. And for me, it's usually if it were a white male, I wouldn't ask that question because that's the naturalized norm group for so many, like for public office, for the physician, everything. So we question people's knowledge when they are packaged, when the package comes to us a little bit differently. And when that little ding happens in your head, you've got to be responsible for checking it and saying, why am I thinking that? Why am I asking myself that? Why am I second guessing what this person is saying, right?
It seems like a lot of that is also culturally, though. I get emails from Google Trends ahead of all of the primary elections, which I find a fascinating little pulse on what public opinion is. And they'll tell you what people are searching in each state, the sort of 6 months leading up to the primary. And what amazed me is ahead of the Georgia gubernatorial race, the number, I want to say 1, 2, it was one of the top questions for both Stacey Evans and Stacey Abrams on Google searches was, is Stacey married? It was not one of the top questions for all the male candidates running on the Republican side. Now, I love my husband. I think it's a great thing to be married. No knock at that. But I just thought that was such an interesting question that people are typing behind their keyboard thinking no one is really ever even going to know that I'm asking that question. So in my mind, a lot of that sort of just built in how we think. That when you're thinking about who to vote for governor, I've just found it so interesting that so many people would be curious, wanting to know, is the nominee married, particularly as it related to the women candidates. But please, go ahead. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Michaela Holly, and I am a current participant in New Leadership Ohio. And my question is basically that in today's society with social media, us as young adults feel rushed to be successful or pressured at all times. So, and I'm a big proponent of continuing education. I always feel like it's something for me and for everyone to learn. So my biggest question would be, when do you feel like you should run? How do you determine when you're ready to run?
That's a great question. I struggle with that right now. Because I love the work that I'm doing. And this fire, I participated in New Leadership 10 years ago. So I've had that question asked by me, will you run for office? Because that's what New Leadership and the John Glenn College is about. It's about getting women to run for office. So I've been thinking about it for quite some time. 2016 hit, and I said, oh my goodness, I need to figure this out. And right now, I'm thinking, okay, well, I really like my job. There are some big goals that we're working on that I want to accomplish. But I feel very confident that in the work that I'm doing within the city of Columbus, that I'm being a public servant. I'm learning as much as I can about the community. I'm taking up a couple of issues that I'm incredibly passionate about, so sexual harassment and sexual assault. And also empowering women. And I'm working with the Republican Party and different candidates that I feel really passionate about to learn about the framework. And I'm hoping that at the right time, I will hear that voice that says, yep, this is the right time, this is the right position where you can have the most impact to serve residents. So don't worry, take every moment that you have as a great opportunity to say yes. And hopefully at some point you'll go, I feel good. This is the right moment. I'm going to do it.
And I think it's also about identifying that right opportunity, right? We talked a little bit this week about the open seat versus challenging the incumbent, right? So there are a lot of women out there this time that are just like challenging, and I'm like, go girl, oh! Because we know that's just such a harder road, but go girl. But, look for the open seats. Understand when people are retiring, right? Have conversations, and here's the critical one, right? Express your ambition. Right. It is okay to tell people, I am interested in running for an office one day. I would like to serve my community as an elected official. It's okay to say that and to claim that as a part of your identity. And once you've said that, start having informational meetings with people about, so I want to do this. What's your advice about how I do this? And then start to watch the retirements. And I joked with you guys, read the obituaries. But find your opening, right? And when you see that open seat.
But to your point on the incumbencies, I just want to share with you guys a really quick story. So right now, there's a really fascinating race to me outside. It's in the Boston area and the suburbs. A woman whose name is Ayanna Pressley is challenging Michael Capuano, a sitting congressman.
Yes.
And this race has exposed so much to me. Because Ayanna Pressley is an African-American woman. She was the first, I believe, African-American woman ever elected to the Boston City Council. But it's not just the racial dynamic that we've seen play out in this race. It's actually a large gender dynamic, in part because she is challenging a very popular congressman. So you have the Congressional Black Caucus, who has come out to support her male incumbent opponent. You have had the only black governor ever in the state of Massachusetts, Deval Patrick, come out and support her opponent. And I should mention, her opponent, Michael Capuano, is a white man. And so to your point, I just think many people saw Ayanna Pressley as a rising star within sort of the political sphere in the area, but she decided to challenge this rather popular incumbent. And so many folks would say maybe she was bitten by the bug, but maybe this wasn't also the right time. I'm not going to say it wasn't the right time for her, but I think that when you do challenge incumbents, you are facing an enormous, enormous uphill battle that you might not face if it was an open seat.
And that is absolutely true, but there are cases where incumbents have been knocked off.
Yes.
And I'm a firm believer that we shouldn't just allow someone to continue to sit in a seat because they are the incumbent and because we think it's going to be difficult to challenge them. Because there are many that are sitting in seats today that are doing more harm than good for women and people of color. And so whether they look like us or not, some of them aren't doing a good job. And so we've got to pay attention to what people are doing, not what they say, but what they're doing. Because it's easy in campaign literature to share your propaganda on what you believe you've done or what you want to share with the people that you've done. So you have to know when the right time is and the right position. There are some exciting races all over the country, and I'm sure we're going to have many successes. We'll probably have some losses, but losses aren't losses. Right. I lost my 1998 race for Secretary of State. I really wanted to be Secretary of State. I didn't really want to be Lieutenant Governor. I did that for my party because they wanted somebody who had already run statewide to be on the ticket because I had the name recognition. But you have to do it because you want to, and you have to use, if you lose, you have to use what you've gained from that race, the contacts you've made, the name recognition, the experience to your advantage. It certainly helped me for all of the rest of my political career.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Beth Workman, and I'm running for the Ohio House of Representatives as a first-time candidate against an incumbent.
Oh, gosh.
You go, girl. And I will take all the volunteers in here. You can help me. My question is, as a woman, how do I talk about why we're going to be better without insulting men in general?
I think you just have to talk about why you specifically as a person and a person who has these skills and talents are better suited to do the job. Whether it's your ideas, whether it's experiences that you've had, whether it's a perspective that you bring to some of the issues that are important to the people of your district. You don't have to insult the candidate to say, simply because you're a woman, you're going to be a better candidate. You have to sell the community on why it is your skills and talents are going to better serve them, not just because you're a woman.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Hello, my name is Gabrielle Woodbury, and I'm also a participant within the New Leadership Ohio this year. And I have a question for Sophia specifically. So you talked about earlier in your career, one of your first bosses allowed you to have a seat at the table. He encouraged you to have one. But when you were at that table, did you speak? And if so, was your speech heard, and were you able to enact change, either small or large?
Yes. So one of the things, I'm a huge advocate for, everybody should be a huge advocate for women and young people to speak up and speak their mind. But when I spoke up, it wasn't just a remark to say, yes, I'm speaking because I just want you to hear my voice. I was speaking with data, with facts, with very, very thoughtful recommendations. I always said them diplomatically. I wanted to make sure that I was providing solutions to problems. So yes, that boss not only encouraged me to sit at the table, but gave me an opportunity to speak up, and I took that moment. If you give me a stage, I will speak. So, so yes, and I encourage every woman to do that, and especially as a young woman, I certainly encourage that. Just make sure that you're speaking with facts, with data, and with solutions.
Thank you.
You know, to this point about speaking at the table, and I'm also thinking about your comment around the reclaiming of a woman's point in a meeting. One of the things we could do as women who are sitting in rooms with other women is to refer back to the woman's comment and to attach her name to it. This is like, communication scholars have done work on this in small groups of deliberation, so we know it works. But we also saw during the Obama administration that the women in the Obama administration saw the kind of male takeover, and they started to do this subversive act, right? Which started to work and got the president's attention differently. There was a wonderful Washington Post article about that scenario. So amplify your friends' voices with their names attached to their comments, and do it in class. I mean, you can practice this now as students in the classroom, because it happens there as well.
All right, guys, I think this is the last question that we'll have time for, but please go ahead.
All right, thank you. I'd like to hear the panelists' thoughts about the dichotomy between gerrymandering of districts, and if we change that in many cases, we will also be hurting minority candidates and people of color in terms of their ability to compete, and which one is more important, to have fewer gerrymandered districts or more opportunities for minority candidates.
I have one quick thought on that, actually. So when I did most recently a story about the difficulty of getting, particularly candidates of color through statewide races, one of the political consultants I spoke with specifically hit on the challenge of that. He hinted at is actually gerrymandered districts. And in part because we live in such segregated communities, you might see a mayor or you might see a state rep who is often a minority candidate, but that doesn't translate often into statewide office, largely because of the political situation we're in now, which is, sort of food for thought. Do you sort of want one political gain versus a long-term political gain? But I'll let the other panelists answer.
So this is an enormously complex conversation, and I think you are picking off that there's some wins and some losses. But I think that if we move towards processes that can allow for more equitable districts, that we actually have districts where people of color can compete and can win. So what we have seen is that we will create majority-minority districts where there's a majority of minority residents, but we don't just create it at 51%, we take it up to 57, 50, like really ridiculous numbers, that you actually do not need that large of a margin in order to actually elect a candidate that demographically represents that community. And so I think it's some smart processes that we could change to bring some of those percentages down. And there's some candidates who are very resistant to that because you want a comfortable win. I don't want to work for it. If I can just, put my name out there and get it over and over again at 57%, then that's great. But that's not actually good for democracy. And one of the things, the group that I find that we don't talk enough about that are actually hurt in our current configuration are moderate Republican women, right? they have the toughest time in their primary races because they are in these districts where it is extraordinarily conservative district, where being a moderate is a disaster, right? So we have, especially across the South, we've completely erased the white moderate Republican woman from the political landscape. And I submit that that's just not good for a democracy overall. And so these smart ways that we're thinking about revisiting this, I think is good for democracy, small d, good, strong, democratic institutions, small d.
Anybody else like to chime in?
The only other point that I would make is that good designed districts are going to ensure that you have candidates that represent the people of their district. That's why in Ohio we really did want to ensure that you kept municipalities whole for those congressional districts, and you kept counties whole so that you could have communities of like mind represented, that their voices would be heard. The way our congressional districts are designed right now, they do not represent the people's voice. And candidates know that they don't even have to listen to people outside of the overwhelming majority of those within their district. That's not healthy in a democracy. But I think we've got to continue to fight for fair districts. We don't need super majorities. There are some parts of the state of Ohio, unfortunately, you do need a majority up north. But here in the city of Columbus, you've got city council members. 4 out of the 7 council members are African American. 4 out of the 7, they're all elected citywide. You couldn't get that in some of those cities up north. So it depends on the history, and that's why sometimes you can't just look at what should be. You've got to look at history and to see how people's voting patterns have taken place as you design those districts. And that's probably much of what has happened in these statewide elections, because the vast majority of Ohio is rural. It is not urban centered.
I think at the end of the day, the most important thing is making sure that we have districts that are fair districts where moderate voices can also be heard, because we make better decisions when we can bring all people to the table and when we can work towards the center. When we work on the fringe on either side, whether it be Republican or Democrat, I don't think that we're going to have good policies that represent all people.
All right, well, that is all the time we have. Thank you all for the excellent questions. And thank you as well to the panelists. I really enjoyed the conversation, and so I hope you all did as well. Thank you.
Senator Shelia Tavares, Asma, Khalid, and Wendy Smooth. And one more round of applause for them. And a round of applause for you. We truly did have a dialogue. We appreciate all your great questions and comments. We wish we had more time. We are going to do more of these. This series will continue in the fall. We'll take a break for the summer, but we will have more of these in the fall. A lot of exciting topics on our radar, probably topics we haven't even thought of in these interesting times that will come up between now and November and the first of the year next year. So please watch your emails from the Glenn College or from WOSU. Watch the Facebook pages, social media, our website, and you'll be able to come again, please. So for the Glenn College of Public Affairs and for WOSU, thanks for coming. Have a good night.